Shalom Aleichem, Erev Tov, good evening. This is definitely our final class in the series. I am just praying that it is not our final class together because B'ezrat Hashem, I'm looking forward to many opportunities of learning together with you. I had the zechut of meeting a beautiful couple. I think I see them on Zoom. Here in my kila for Purim, I want to wish them a mazal tov to David and to Natalie, who, from what I understand, are part of Ibn Sefarad in Mexico. And I asked my forgiveness. I didn't let them come in person, but we're as close as we can be on Zoom. B'ezrat Hashem yitbarach. Tonight's shiur is dedicated to something that you might think would not interfere so much in the lives of a Beit HaMikdash titled Ibn Sefarad. But likely, it already has, not just because of the Sephardic communities that are dealing with the topic we're about to discuss, but because the topic which we're going to discuss tonight of Kitniyot is a symptom of a much larger issue that divides the Jewish community in two completely different perspectives on halakha and minhagim, on Jewish law and custom. And I think that if we take Kitniyot as a case study, it may actually reflect and explain to us so much of the things that we have been struggling with. So many of those things will become clear because we study this topic of Kitniyot. So I ask that even if you already eat rice and corn and beans and whatever else you eat on Pesaḥ, like all of the Chachamim did, that you don't turn off your ears and stop listening, because I think the evolution of this minhag of Kitniyot is something that is very important for every person to understand and to internalize, because only then will we get clarity in many other areas of Judaism. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'doro. I titled today's class Kaleidoscopic Kitniyot. Kitniyot it's like an avalanche. Something started somewhere, and where we are today is a completely different somewhere than where anybody was yesterday, and completely different than it was the generation before, and definitely 1,000 years ago, this minhag already looked completely different than what we recognize today to be known as Kitniyot. Before we start, let's first work some terms here. There are some words that we need to know. If you look at source number 1, I think it's always a novel place to start with the Torah. So the Torah says the following: Shivat yamim matzot tochelu. If you don't have the source sheet, you can go to shiviti.org/Ibn Sefarad, and you'll find the source sheet attached over there. If not, if someone is tech savvy, if you don't mind just posting the source sheet in the comments, I would very much appreciate that, especially for the new people coming in. Shivat yamim matzot tochelu. You should eat matzot for 7 days. Which is not exactly an accurate translation, because our rabbis tell us that you don't have to eat matzot all 7 days of Pesaḥ. It is really rather that you cannot eat chametz. Let's read. Ach bayom harishon, but on the first day, tashbitu seor mibatechem. You shall, let's say for simple English, put away the seor from your homes. Ki kol ochel chametz v'nichreta hanefesh ahim Yisrael miyom harishon ad yom hashvi'i. Because anyone who eats chametz on Pesach from the first day until the 7th day, or outside of Eretz Yisrael until the 8th day, that soul shall be cut off from Yisrael, from the Jewish people. Lo alenu, it is a prohibition of karet, the most severe of the prohibitions that we have in the Torah. Let's define some terms, and I'm going to do them backwards. So usually you're supposed to do things the right way. I'm going to do things out of order. What is chametz? Can someone define for me a textbook definition of chametz?
Any flour that's come into contact with water and remains so for 18 minutes or something like that.
Okay, so Yochanan, you're 95% there, but you're an attorney. I expect a little more diuk from you. Not any flour, because you have potato flour and cassava flour. What kind of flour?
Any of the 5 species.
Very good. So any of the flour from the 5 grains, we're going to discuss what those are in just a couple of minutes. But any flour from the 5 prohibited grains on, not the 5 prohibited grains, but the 5 grains that our Chachamim identify as grains, if they are come in contact with water, and it doesn't have to be in flour form, it could also be in the grain form. If they come in contact with water for longer than a certain amount of time. It seems to be the shi'ur that we are using today, the number we're using today. I'm not telling you that it's not without controversy, but that number is 18 minutes from when the water comes in contact with the grain. That becomes chametz. The word chametz literally means, what root does it share with what other words?
Chometz.
Okay, chometz, that's right. Chometz has the same root. Why? What's the word that's the root here?
Chet and Mem.
Chet mem tzadi, chamutz, right? Something sour, when something ferments, it starts to rise. That is the word here, chametz. So tell me then, what is the word? What is the word se'o? Se'o. And don't tell me yeast.
Leaven.
Leaven, they say. What does leaven mean?
Starter.
Wait, say leaven. What is leaven? What does leaven mean? We use the word leaven, unleavened. What is leaven?
Like sourdough.
Okay, you're answering my question of se'o. I'm asking you, what does the word leaven mean?
Something that will rise and puff up.
Okay. So
That's fermented.
right, so let's say very clearly, there are many things that are fermented that are permitted to be consumed on Pesaḥ. You agree with me? Give me an example.
Yes. Yeah.
Give me an example.
Pickle.
Sauerkraut.
Okay, kraut, cheese. How about I'll tell you one more. Tell me a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of something fermented you have to have on Pesaḥ. Wine. It's very important not to use words like leaven, fermented. All of these words are going to mislead people in the understanding of halakha. Simply use the Hebrew word and tell people that the English word or the Spanish word simply doesn't contain the right parameters that you would need in halakha. Se'o is, as you said, it's a starter dough. So you have a dough, right? Before we used modern yeast and all of these things, and I'm not a baker, so forgive me for my ignorance in explaining this. I'm sure some other of you could do it better than I. You take a sourdough, which is essentially a spoiled dough. What is a sourdough? You ever smell the sourdough? There's a reason why it's called a sourdough. This sourdough, today they call them mother doughs, right? It's the mother dough. You take a piece of the dough, usually keep it in a dry place, a dark place, and you take that sourdough and you put it inside of a fresh dough, and that causes the dough to rise. So that is se'o. By the way, very interesting. You would think that because it's already spoiled, it's not a problem of chametz, but no, that's what the Torah is telling you, that both fresh chametz and se'o, soured chametz, those both are prohibited on Pesaḥ. Is yeast prohibited to use on Pesaḥ? No, not necessarily. It's not a prohibition of se'o, for sure not. They translate se'o as yeast, but that's incorrect. That's not a halachic definition. Now let's continue. Matzot. And therefore, if we know that chametz is any of the 5 grains that have come in contact with water for longer than 18 minutes, and se'o is that on steroids, it's what actually makes the dough rise because it's been in contact with water for so long, what is matzah? Not all at once. I'm sure you all know what are matzot. Hopefully you know what are matzot.
It's a bread that's been finished cooking within the 18 minutes.
Okay, so matzah is chametz just 1 minute younger. Right? Matzah is flour with water that has not been given a chance to hit the 18-minute mark. The difference between chametz and matzah is minuscule. That's time for drashot for another time. But that is the definition of matzah. I'm not going to give you a shiur now on crackers and whether crackers are matzot. If you want to join me in San Diego on Sunday, we're baking soft matzot in the original Sephardic style. If you'd like to join us here, we bake every year. This year it's coming out on Sunday. You're all invited to be with me and see what a real matzah looks like. Not a cracker that you dip in your salsa or guacamole. And that's not a matzah. So now, we have 3 words. Chametz, se'o, matzah. What is prohibited on Pesach? Chametz and se'o. What is permitted on Pesach? Everything else. What about a grain? If I want to eat a grain on Pesach, then it has to fall into the category of matzah. Something which was in contact with water, but was finished cooking before it hit the 18-minute mark. Are grains or flour prohibited on Pesach? Are they chametz on Pesach? No, right? Grains and flour are not prohibited on Pesach. Can you keep flour in your house on Pesach? Sure. My grandmother used to bake matzot every single morning of Pesach. What is she going to bake with? With a matzah meal? She baked it with flour. But you have to make sure the flour didn't come in contact with water. You want to make sure it wasn't processed with water. Of course, you have to do your homework about the flour that you keep. But flour and grains in and of themselves are not chametz on Pesach. Now that we know that, let's go to the Gemara. Start with the Mishnah on source 2. The Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim says, Elu devarim she'adam yotze bahen yedei chovato bepesach. These are things that a person can fulfill their matzah obligation with on Pesach. So, I have to eat matzah by the Seder Pesach. What can matzah be made out of? You go today to the store, and they have gluten-free matzot made out of potato flour. Can I eat a matzah made out of potato flour on Pesach? Yes. Can I fulfill my obligation with it for the Seder? No, because it's not really a matzah. It's not a matzah, okay? It doesn't hit the legal definition of a matzah. So what can I use for my matzot? I'm only going to translate 2. The other 3, I'm going to let you break your head over them. Bechitim, with wheat. Bisaorim, with barley. And they translate chusmin and shifon and shibol shual as spelt rye and oats. That is a matter of much debate. I'm not sticking my head in that right now. I want to stay away. So what can you make matzah out of? At the very least, out of wheat and barley. Any of the 5 grains can be made into matzah. That also means that any of those 5 grains could become chametz. Anything that is not in this category cannot be used for matzah. And anything that is not in this category also cannot be considered chametz. Very good. It's very simple. So if it can become matzah, it can become chametz. If it cannot become matzah, it cannot become chametz. And that's all you need to know. Really, I can end my shiur right now. There's nothing else that you need to know. Before I go any further, can someone tell me, what are kitniyot? I'm going to push you hard, so you can answer, and I'm still going to keep pushing you.
Legumes.
Okay, legumes. So they say, like, what are those?
Other types
Kidney
of
beans,
grains.
lentils.
Other types of grains?
It's not wheat.
Our Chachamim gave us 5 grains. Those grains can become chametz. What are kitniyot?
Things that grow from the ground.
Okay, let's how about we do it? Let's make a list. Who does not eat kitniyot on Pesaḥ for the most part?
Ashkenazi.
Ashkenazim, for the most part. There are Sfaradim who also don't eat kitniyot. I know that. You don't have to feel special. I know that there are Sfaradim like that, of course. But tell me, what are the kitniyot? So beans, I heard. What else?
Lentils.
What?
Batzubi.
Those are beans. What else? Corn. What else?
Quinoa.
Quinoa. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, let's add. I'm going to add to the why not? Add them to the list. Let's make quinoa, new ones. Yeah. Rice. Very good. I was worried you guys forgot. Rice.
Sesame seed.
Sesame seeds. Okay, very good. Let's keep going. What else? You're not done. The list didn't finish. Peanuts. Okay, peanuts. We're getting. I see machmirim here.
Did someone already say corn?
Corn, we said, but it's okay. We'll say it again.
Okay.
Lima beans.
What kind of beans?
Lima beans.
Lima beans. Okay, so all the beans. I'll put all the beans together. Let's pause here. What is the common denominator between all of those foods? What category do they fit into? Are they all legumes? No way. No. They're not. Some of those things you mentioned are seeds. Some of the things you mentioned are probably vegetables. Let me ask you, the Jews who refrain from eating kitniyot do so because, what's the answer?
You can make flour out of it.
Because you can make flour out of it. Okay, let's write that. Answer number one. Answer number two, why else?
They used to make the sacks of the grains.
Okay, because you might use a sack that has wheat flour for beans, and then the beans now supposedly would have a problem of chametz. Okay, what else?
Because they didn't eat it generations ago.
Because they didn't eat it generations ago. Can you have a minhag about something you don't eat? But can I make a minhag about a food that wasn't discovered yet?
You shouldn't.
No, the definition of a minhag is something that used to be done. If it didn't used to be done, there can't possibly be minhag. Okay, keep going. What else?
Then Europe did not have this kind of vegetable.
But they did. They had a minhag about them. So tell me, you have to make up your mind.
Okay.
That if they get in contact with water, they germinate like lentils and.
So something happens to them when they come in contact with water. There are a lot of things that would fit that category that people eat on Pesaḥ. If you put a potato inside of water, things happen to it too. If you put a carrot inside of water. Let me tell you this. I want to save you a lot of heartache. There is no textbook definition of what are kitniyot. Nothing. There's not one answer you can tell me. Things you can make flour out of, you can make flour out of potatoes. And they do it all the time. Remember the matzot they make out of potatoes? Things that they might put in different sacks. They put apples in sacks, and the apples now are going to become kitniyot. There is no answer to this question. The only thing we can study together is not the logic behind something illogical. We can study the evolution of a custom and to see how it's born. And to understand how things are born, you have to start all the way at the beginning. So I'm glad that we determined so far that we don't know what kitniyot are. We just know a lot of things that fall into the category of kitniyot. Let's read together. Talmud Bavli, the Talmud tells us the following. All of these grains, they can all be used for matzah. Look in the bold. Orez v'dochan, lo. But you cannot use rice and millet. Those cannot be made into matzah. Look at the next section, the bold part. Devarim habaim lidei chimutz. All things that can become chametz. Adam yotze behem yidei chovato b'matzah. A person is able to use them to make matzah. Yatzeu elu she'en bain lidei chimutz. So this comes to exclude all things that cannot become chametz. Rather, what do they become? El lidei sirachon. They become, what's sirchon? Sirchon is, they spoil. Matnitin de lo ki Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And this, therefore, Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said the following. Damar, he said, Orez min daganhu. Orez is one of the grains. V'chayavin al chimutzo karet. And if you eat rice on Pesaḥ, a person would be liable for the penalty of karet. The Tanya, as we learn, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri oser be'orez v'dochan mipnei shekarov lehachmitz. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri prohibits eating rice or millet that came in contact with water on Pesaḥ because they are close to being chametz. What does that mean, close to being chametz? I don't have a good answer for you. But clearly the Mishnah, does the Mishnah agree with Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that rice is one of the 5 grains? No, it does not. It does not. Look at the Mishnah in source 4. If you're sitting at the Seder, what happens? If they bring for you, הביאו לפניו, מטבל בחזרת עד שמגיע לפרפר את הפת. הביאו לפניו מצה וחזרת וחרוסת ושני תבשילין, אף על פי שאין חרוסת מצווה. Here the Chachamim are having a conversation about things that you eat at the Seder. They say they brought before him matzah and charoset and 2 cooked dishes in honor of the holiday. The Gemara on page 2, source 5, wants to know, Ma'ishne tavshilin. What are the two cooked foods the Mishnah is talking about that we eat at the Seder Pesach? Listen very carefully. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, Silka ve'aroza. Beets and rice. Now, silka, you want to argue, some have a custom silka as spinach. I'm not getting in here now. But aroza, everybody agrees. What is aroza? Is rice. So what do you eat at the Seder on Pesach, according to the Talmud? Beets and rice. Rava, hava mehadar kasilka va'aroza. Rava was very particular that he would look for beets and rice for Pesach. Why? Ho'il v'nafek mipumeh de Rav Huna. Because it came out of the mouth of Rav Huna that you eat rice on Pesach. He would make sure every time that on Pesach he would eat rice. Even though it's not a legal ruling, you have to eat rice, but that was what Rav Huna said. That's what Rava wanted to do. Amar Rav Asher said, Shema mina de Rav Huna, from that which Rav Huna said, Let dechayesh leha de Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. You see that there is no one who takes into consideration the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. The Tanya, because Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri omer, Orez min dagan hu v'chayvin lechimutzo karet, v'adam yotze bo yedei chovato bepesach. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said that rice is forbidden to eat on Pesach, and a person will get the penalty of karet, and that you are allowed to make matzot out of rice on Pesach. That's how much Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri believed that rice is chametz. Who agreed with that? Says the Gemara, nobody. Why? Because we find that our chachamim at their Seder Pesach are eating rice. So far, we hear that there's one chacham in history who believed that rice is one of the grains that are forbidden on Pesach. That is also one of the grains you could use for matzah on Pesach. But what do the rest of the chachamim believe? Not only that he's wrong, they even go to eat rice. They look to eat rice on Pesach. And then comes Rabbeinu HaRambam. The Rambam in source 6 codifies this halacha. En isur mishum chametz bepesach, ela chameshet minei dagan bilvad. The only things that are prohibited because of chametz on Pesach are the 5 grains that were mentioned in the Torah. Aside from that, by our chachamim from the Torah. Aside from that, what about other things? Let's keep reading. Aval kitniyot, but legumes. And it's not legumes. Kitniyot are their own word. Kagon, like orez and rice, v'dochan, ufulim, v'adashim, and beans and lentils and all these things. V'chayotze behen, en behem mishum chametz. They do not become chametz. Ela afilu lash kemach orez. Even if you make rice, flour. V'chayotze bo, berotchin, and you knead it as a dough and you cook it in hot. V'chisahu bivgadim ad shlitapech mo batzek shechmitz, until it rises and becomes like a dough, a real dough that became chametz. Harei ze mutar ba'achila. It is permissible to eat this on Pesach. She'en ze chimutz, ela serachon. Because this is not chimutz, this is serachon. It is not, I'm going to use a word, it didn't rise, rather it's spoiled. Rice that became, have you ever smelled spoiled rice before? It's a terrifying smell. It mamash, like somebody died in the house. Yes, rice doesn't become chametz. Rice simply spoils. That's what happens when it rises. And therefore the Rambam tells us, like the Mishnah, like the Talmud, that if it's not one of the 5 grains, you cannot use it for matzah, and you're allowed to eat it on Pesach. So, life is simple. There's nothing else you need to know. Really, I should end the shiur here, and you know everything you need to know about Kitniyot. There was a rabbi in the Talmud who believed that rice was not allowed to be eaten on Pesach. Nobody ruled like him, and the Rambam also, in his book of Halachot, didn't even take that opinion into consideration. But life can never be so simple. If life was simple, then we wouldn't be Jewish. And so in steps source number 7. By the way, if anyone needs to interrupt me at any point because there's something that I didn't explain properly or it's holding you back from understanding what we're learning, please don't be shy. If it's something that can wait until the end, a general question, then I'm going to be here at the end for as long as you want. Source 7. Rabbeinu Manoach. Rabbeinu Manoach, and I put here for you in parentheses under every book, the place and the time in which this Chacham lived. So you can watch as the custom evolves. So we're in 13th century France. Katuv b'sefer ha-minhagot. It is written in the book of Minhagim, says Rabbeinu Manoach. V'nahagu kol ha'olam. The whole world has a minhag. This is very important for you to know. It's very common among Ashkenazi Chachamim to view themselves as the center of the universe. When they say the whole world feels a certain way, they mean all of the people they know. All of the Chachamim, that means all of the rabbis who live in this town. Not even a city, it's a town. So here, Na'agu kol ha'olam, everybody in the world has a minhag. Shelo lechol zironim bePesaḥ, not to eat seeds on Pesaḥ. Mipnei shehen machmitzim, because they become chametz. V'al ken nikraim chitzmi, and that's why they call them chitzmi. V'lo mistaber lomar sheyeh minhag talui b'isur klal. But it's not normal to think that it's not logical to assume that this minhag is because of some halachic problem. She'en b'shum kitniyot ba'olam shum chimutz, because there is no real problem of chametz when it relates to kitniyot. Ela mipnei she'en tzarich lechol kitniyot b'moed. So what's the reason why Ashkenazi Jews don't eat kitniyot on Pesaḥ? It's not because there's a halachic problem. Says Rabbeinu Manoach, everybody knows there's no halachic problem with eating kitniyot on Pesaḥ. So what's the problem? Because you don't have to eat these things on Pesaḥ. Sharei katuv, it says, v'samachta b'chagecha. You should be happy in your holiday. Ve'en simcha b'achilat tafshil kitniyot. And the eating of these types of foods, of kitniyot, don't make a person happy. How come nobody told me this reason? Because the first time that we find kitniyot mentioned anywhere in halachic literature, nobody gives any of the reasons you mentioned. The reason given, kitniyot is not a food that makes people happy. You should be happy on Pesaḥ, so don't eat these foods on Pesaḥ. Ve'en safek, there's no doubt, she'im ratza lechol zironim bePesaḥ, that if a person wanted to eat kitniyot on Pesaḥ, v'chayotze bo b'shar minei kitniyot, mutar, that it's allowed. Ve'en bezeh chashash isur klal. And there is no even a doubt of a prohibition involved here at all. Nothing. Afal piken, shena'agu, דהאמרים בירושלמי, מקום שנהגו כל דבר שמותר וטועה בו באיסור, נשאל ומתירינו. So what about the fact that it became the custom already, that nobody eats it? He said, we already learned in Talmud Yerushalmi that a custom that is permitted, but people think it's not allowed, now when they realize it is allowed, all they have to do is do a hatarat and darim, and they can eat that food. So Rabbeinu Manoach says, the reason for minhag kitniyot is because this food is not such an important food. And it doesn't make anybody happy to eat this on Pesaḥ. And if a person wanted to, they're more than welcome to do so. There is no minhag prohibiting a person to do so. Now this is very important. One, because the reason given is fascinating. Imagine telling a Sephardic Jew, imagine from Iran, that rice is not a food you eat on a holiday. What do you mean? Rice is a food, it's a food you eat every day. What do you mean a holiday? Every day. Imagine going to tell somebody that, imagine telling somebody in Mexico that rice and beans and corn and all of these foods, why do you have to eat them on Pesaḥ? That's bad food. Come on, eat them on a different day. You can imagine, you have to live in a very particular place to feel this way. There's a man in my community, a very healthy person. He once moved to a very religious community out somewhere in America, I don't want to tell you where. And when he came to the rabbi, he said, Rabbi, I'm very careful. I eat very little. And the things that I eat is a little bit of rice, a little bit of quinoa, a little bit of salmon. I don't eat much more than that. The rabbi said, well, it's time you learn how to eat like a mensch. Time you learn how to eat like a human being, not like an animal. Birds eat those kind of things. Human beings. That's a ridiculous thing. Only if you live in a certain place can you speak like that. But of course, my question on this source, V'samachta b'chagecha, who knows their Torah well? Which holiday does it say V'samachta b'chagecha? About Sukkot. So we borrow it for the other holidays. Also, you should be happy in all the holidays. But why does nobody have a minhag that you cannot eat kitniyot on Sukkot? I shouldn't give them ideas. I'm afraid that soon they're going to announce it's a new minhag. We don't eat kitniyot on Sukkot either. And then all Ashkenazim are going to die of hunger by the time Chanukah rolls around. So, just an idea. It's a good one. Rabbi Yitzchak of Korbin, who lived in France, he's otherwise known as the Smak, Sefer Mitzvot Katan. He says, Al kitniyot, Raboteinu nohagim behem isur shelo laochlam bePesaḥ klal. Our rabbis have a custom not to eat kitniyot at all. Nohagim behem isur. This is already a different language. They treat it as prohibited. Davar shenohagim bo haolam isur mimei chachamim hakadmonim. This is something that the whole world considers prohibited from the days of our early chachamim. Which early chachamim? Literally, the first time we hear about this prohibition is the 13th century in France. Which earlier chachamim? How come they didn't tell us anything? What are their names? Who? Who said? The Rambam? He doesn't talk about this. He says mutar. The Talmud? They rule against Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Who are you talking about? But he continues. ולכן נראה לקיים המנהג ולאסור כל הקטניות בפסח. And therefore we have to uphold this custom and prohibit all of the kitniyot on Pesach. ולא מחמת חימות עצמו, and not because they can become chametz. כי טעות הוא לומר כן. It's a mistake to think that kitniyot can become chametz, says the smak. אלא מטעם גזרה הוא. It's because of a gezerah, a decree, a rabbinic decree. What's the decree? Who? For what reason? Listen. דכיוון דקטניות מעשה קדרה הוא, because you cook kitniyot in a pot, ודגן נמה מעשה קדרה הוא, and you also cook grains in a pot, יהבי שרינן kitniyot, אולי עתי להחלופה. If we let people eat kitniyot in a pot, maybe they'll come to eat grains that are also cooked in a pot. וגם מידי דמתגנן דהו כמו ה' מינים, וגם יש מקומות שרגילים לעשות מהם פת כמו ה' המינים. There are people who make bread out of kitniyot, like they make out of the 5 grains. ולכן עתי להחלופה לאותן שאינם בני תורה. Those who are not bnei Torah, again another very presumptuous term, those who are not Torah learners, those people will come to make a mistake and eat chametz on Pesach because they see people eating kitniyot on Pesach, because they can make bread out of it on Pesach. And everybody will fall apart. And because of that, we have to uphold this because of a gezerah, a decree. So it's not even a century. And already we're using words like isul, prohibition, kadmonim, an ancient one. We're using words like gezerah, a decree. For what reason? Because maybe people will come to be confused and they will eat chametz on Pesach, chas v'shalom. And he says in source 9, there's a haga, there's a note in the smak. There's a Muri Rabbi Chiel, my rabbi Rabbi Chiel in France. He used to eat this white bean. Maybe it's fava, I don't know what you would call this. And he said that the great rabbis used to eat this also. Mihu, nonetheless, קשה הדבר מאוד להתיר דבר שנוהגים בו העולם איסור מימי חכמים הקדמונים. It's very difficult to permit something that the whole world prohibits based on the teachings of the ancient rabbis. So here you have Rabbi Chiel, his rabbi, who used to eat this kind of kitniyot on Pesach. And he says he heard this from the giants before him. And the long is no, but we can't permit it because it's a custom that everybody already does, and the great ancient rabbis used to do it. So which is it? They ate it or they didn't eat it? But let's continue. We're not done. In source 10, there was a rabbi in Vienna, Austria, in the 13th century, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Moshe. He wrote a famous book called the Or Zarua. The Or Zarua writes the following. Haminhag shenahagu avotenu, source 10, on page 3. The custom that our forefathers had not to eat kitniyot on Pesach, machamat ta'ut. It was born out of a mistake. There was a mistake. Somewhere along the line, someone made a mistake. It's not correct. You don't have to keep this custom. So now you find in Austria, the Or Zarua, the major poskim, says this custom, yes, it exists, but it's a mistake. You don't have to do mistaken customs. So we went from, it's because it's not important enough on the holiday, to it's a gzerah from the early ancient rabbis, to now it's a mistake that was started somewhere, and you should know that the history of it is a mistake. Source 11. Along comes Germany in the 13th century. There's a chacham, it's called the Mordechai. That's how they know him, Rabbi Mordechai ben Hillel. He writes the following. כתב בשם רבנו יצחק מקורביל בספר סמ"ק, קטניות כגנפולים ועדשים, יש נוהגים בהם איסור מלאוכלם בפסח. There are some rabbis who prohibit eating of קטניות, וכן היה נוהג רבנו שמואל מעברה, and Rabbeinu Shemuel had that custom. Aval Rabbeinu Yechiel u'shar gdolim, and Rabbeinu Yechiel and the other great rabbis, hayu nohagim behem heter, they would eat them on Pesach. וקשה מאוד הדבר להתיר כיוון שהאחים נהגו בהם איסור ולא משום חימוץ נהגו לאסור. He said, and it's very hard to permit kitniyot, even though the great rabbis ate them, but it's not because of chametz. שהרי אפילו תינוקות של בית רבן יודעים, because even the babies in the yeshivot, in the schools, the little children, they know שאינם באים לידי חימוץ אלא 5 מיני דגן בלבד, that only the 5 grains can become chametz. ולא יטעה בזה שום אדם, לא יטעה בזה, no person will make a mistake about this. And then it gives all the reasons that we heard before. אלא כיוון שהדגן מעשה גדרה הוא וכן הכיוון מעשה גדרה, because they're both foods that are cooked in pots, גזרו על בישול קטניות משום בישול דגן. There was a rabbinic gezerah. We don't know from who, we don't know from where, we don't know which bedin. But there was a rabbinic gezerah that prohibited eating kitniyot because you cook them just like you cook grains. ועוד, and also שפעמים תבואה מעורבת בהם ואי אפשר לבררם יפה. Because sometimes grains get mixed into the kitniyot, and it's very difficult to separate them. It's a new reason now. You heard it's a new reason. What happens is that the rice might have barley in it. And because of that, you don't separate them. It's very difficult to separate them, and you can't eat it on Pesach. ואף על פי שבתלמוד התירו אורז וקטניות בבישול, and even though in the Talmud our rabbis explicitly permitted eating rice and kitniyot, יש להחמיר בדורות אלו, we have to be strict in this generation. שאינם בקיאים כל כך בדיני איסור והיתר כדורות הראשונים. Because this generation is not as, they're not such experts in the laws of Kashrut like previous generations, and because of that we have to uphold this prohibition. You know, there's a show in Israel called Kochav Nolad, like the birth of a TV star. Now I'm telling you the birth of a minhag. This is how it happens. Somebody threw an arrow somewhere, and somebody's painting all the bullseyes around it. That's what's happening right now. We're trying to come up with a reason for something that we know is a mistake. How do we know it's a mistake? Because it goes against the Talmud. It's not found in the Torah. But let's continue. 12. Rabbeinu Yerucham. Rabbeinu Yerucham has a beautiful book on halakha that's not very much printed. There's a lot of superstition surrounding the printing of Rabbeinu Yerucham's books. He was in France and Spain in the 13th and 14th century. And he writes the following. Ve'otam, those Jews, shenahagu, who had the custom, shelo le'echol orez u'minei kitniyot mevushal bePesaḥ, those who had a custom not to eat rice and kitniyot on Pesach, minhag shtuthu, it is a stupid custom. It's a nonsensical custom. It's a shtut. That's what the word shtut means. Yes? Zulatim hem osim nachmir al atzmam, unless they're doing it to be strict on themselves, velo yadati lama, but I cannot fathom why not eating kitniyot has anything to do with being strict on yourself. You know, there's a chumah among some Hasidim that there's a food they don't eat on Pesach. Which is the most dangerous food to eat on Pesach? The most problematic food to eat on Pesach?
Matzah.
Matzah. Very good, matzah. Because matzah actually has grains in it. More than rice, more than beans, more than corn. There was a Gaon of Lisa. His custom was Ashkenazi, not to eat, aside from the Seder where you have to eat matzah, he wouldn't touch matzah for the rest of Pesach. Because if anything was going to have a problem of chametz, it was going to be the matzah we eat on Pesach. The more matzah you eat, the higher the chances are you're eating chametz. The more rice you eat, the more corn you eat, the more beans you eat, doesn't bring you at all to a prohibition of chametz. There's not a reality. So, the Ritba. Ritba lives in Seville, Spain, in the 13th century. And he said that the minhag among the Sfaradim is to eat kitniyot on Pesach. But, mikol makom, nonetheless, tzarich lizaher me'od, we have to be very careful. Sharei nimtza im ha'orez mimin ha'kusmin tamid, there's always some chametz that gets stuck with the rice. V'im nishar sham afilu gargir echad, even there's one little kernel, nimtza shnesar hakol bebishulo b'mashahu, then that chametz makes all of the rice chametz on Pesach. ולכן צריך לבדוק אותו פעם אחר פעם בעיון גדול. A person has to check their rice or kitniyot very well before Pesach. והרבה מן החסידים נמנעו מלאכול מהם בפסח מבושלים מפני ערבובים שעושה מהם. And there are some Hasidim that are careful, many Hasidim, he says, that are careful not to eat this rice on Pesach because there's grains mixed into them. Can I ask a question, a factual question? Does anyone here have a minhag to eat rice on Pesach but to check the rice first? Anyone?
Most Sfaradim.
I didn't ask. I asked if anyone here has the minhag to eat rice on Pesach, then check it first.
Me.
Yes.
Yes. When you checked your rice, how many times did you find things inside of your rice? Anything?
Almost never.
Almost. I'm talking about rocks and bugs and plants. What about chametz? You ever found chametz in your rice?
No.
Did anyone here find chametz in their rice ever? Never. You never. It never happened to you. It's not a mitzvah. Ritba is talking about a reality. Clearly, wherever he lived, this was a problem. But to say that we don't eat rice and you have to check the rice first, or else, if the reality tells you that the rice does not have anything in it, then what are you checking for?
Maybe one question.
Yes.
Maybe the rice in those times was with the shell and might be confused with the barley. But now the rice you buy is polished and clean.
Very good. So I'm not arguing that the Ritba, maybe where he lived, really this was a problem. But where we live, at least where all of us live on the Zoom call now, we don't know of rice that is mixed with other things. It's simply not the mitziut. It's not the reality. But I'm not telling you Pesach halacha now. Now we're just learning the evolution. Source 14. Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher. He's an Ashkenazi rabbi, born in Spain. Or at least he's a rabbi in Spain. His father, the Rosh, was an Ashkenazi rabbi who was a rabbi in Spain. And he says the same thing that everyone said before about all the 5 grains. And then he says in bold, in source 14, V'yesh osrim lechol orez v'chol minei kitniyot. And there are some Jews who prohibit the eating of rice and other kitniyot. Why? Lefi sheminei chitin mitarvim bahem. Because there's types of grains that get mixed in them. V'chumra yitera hizo. V'lo nahagu ken. And this is an excessive chumrah. It's too much. And nobody has this minhag. We don't have this minhag. So here you find Ashkenazi Chachamim who are familiar with this minhag. The two wrote a book on Ashkenazi Halacha. And he says, we know this minhag. And we're telling you that it's excessive and we don't have this custom. And that's what leads Maran, the Shulchan Aruch, in source 15, to tell us in Spain and Israel, 15th, 16th century, Velet dechash dvarim halalu. There is no one who takes this into consideration, Zulat Ashkenazim, aside from the Ashkenazim. So don't tell me that you have a Sephardic minhag, not to eat rice, not to eat beans, not to eat corn. Maran says, we don't, only Ashkenazim have this. In this term, let dechash dvarim halalu, no one takes into consideration. He's borrowing that term from the Talmud that says no one took Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri seriously. Yes, he prohibited rice, but nobody, the Chachamim didn't take his opinion seriously. And therefore, in the Shulchan Aruch itself, Maran writes the following in source 16, that these are the 5 grains, and then he says in the end, that rice and other kitniyot, gam enam baim lidei chimutz, they don't become chametz, umutar la'asot mehem tafshil, and you can make food out of them on Pesach, meaning you can cook them, you can bake them, you can do whatever you want to do with them on Pesach, you're allowed to eat these foods on Pesach. So Sephardim, who follow Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam, have no reason on earth not to eat kitniyot on Pesach. But the Rama, Rabbi Moshe Isserlish of Krakow, Poland, in the 16th century, he writes, Haga v'yesh osrim, and some they prohibit kitniyot on Pesach. V'aminhag be'Ashkenaz lehachmir, and the custom in Ashkenaz is to be strict. Ve'en lishanot, and you're not allowed to change this custom. Can I just nitpick here for a moment? Lehachmir means that there's 2 opinions, and they're strict like one of the opinions. But our Chachamim don't even accept that there is such an opinion. It's not a chumrah here. If you don't eat kitniyot on Pesach, you don't get anything for that. There's no chumrah here. But okay, let's... Mihu pashut, but it's very simple and obvious. De'en osrim b'di'avad im naflu tocha tafshil. Remember this very carefully. The Rama says that if it by accident falls into the food, it does not make the food prohibited. וכן מותר להשעות מיני קטניות בבית. You're allowed to own kitniyot on Pesaḥ. So Rama tells you, yes, we are strict, we have this custom, we don't eat kitniyot, but if it falls into the food, what's the halacha? It's mutar. Why? Because it's not prohibited. And you're allowed to own it on Pesaḥ. Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, it should be Shalom al Israel, we should really end now. But it doesn't end there. Because in the 14th and 15th century we find that the Maharil, who's the father of Ashkenazi Minhagim, he writes in source 18. Val Yomar Adam, 3 lines from the bottom, 4 lines. And a person should not say, Kevan she'en isur midoraita en lachush, because there's no biblical prohibition of kitniyot, we don't have to worry. Dechol degazur rabanan haoved alav chayav mita, because every rabbinic decree, if you violate it, you're liable for the death penalty. Ve'over, and you violate alot asur min hadavar asher rucha, you cannot deviate from that which your chachamim tell you. Can you tell me these 2 prohibitions? Of deviating from the words of our chachamim, you're liable for the death penalty. Which chachamim are we talking about? That's found in the Talmud, Masechet Berachot, page 4. What do chachamim mean when they say that? Who are they talking about?
The very old sages from many centuries.
Which very old? How old?
The times of the Mishnah.
Yeah, very good. The Sanhedrin. Times of Mishnah and the Talmud. What if I get together all the rabbis in humanity right now? Can they make a gezerah that if I violate it, I'm liable for the death penalty? No. The same with lo tasur bin hadavar asher yerucha. You're not allowed to deviate from the words of the rabbis. That's not what it says. That's a pasuk in the Torah. The Torah tells us that when there's a matter of halakha that is not clear to the bedin, we go to the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim, yes, and we ask them for their opinion, and what they tell us, we don't deviate from their ruling. With all due respect to Chachamei Ashkenaz, are they the Sanhedrin who are sitting in Jerusalem? No, it's not offensive. None of the Ashkenazi Chachamim would be offended if you did not give them the status of a Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim. But somehow, already by 14th, 15th century Germany, we're treating this minhag that we don't know who started, we don't know when it started, we don't know which bedin decreed it, if it's really a decree, and we're saying that anybody who violates this minhag is liable for the death penalty and is violating a biblical prohibition. That's how far we got. But we're not even near the end. Look in source 19. So you found along the way a few Ashkenazi Chachamim who opposed this, like the Ozarua, who said this minhag is a mistake. You found the Tur, who says, no, this is an excessive minhag, we don't take this one into consideration. I don't think anyone among the Ashkenazim opposed this minhag as much as a famous Chacham, Rabbi Yaakov Imdin, otherwise known as the Ya'abetz or the Yaibetz. The Ashkenazim call him Yaibetz. Rabbi Yaakov Imdin writes the following in source 19. And I'm testifying concerning my father, the genius. Who was the father of Rabbi Yaakov Imdin? I'll help you. Ya'abetz stands for Yaakov ben Tzvi. Who's Tzvi?
Chacham Tzvi.
Chacham Tzvi, right? The famous Chacham Tzvi is an Ashkenazi rabbi who learns by Sephardic Chachamim. Yes? And that's why they call Chacham Tzvi. There are certain things he was very particular about that he learned from the Sephardim. Another thing he was particular about, and we know something the Chacham Tzvi was particular, he learned from the Sephardim, aside from being called Chacham. He was careful that when studying Torah, anyone know?
His pronunciation of Hebrew should be accurate.
Okay. In particular, to say HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name when you read it. Stop using the word Hashem. Hashem means nothing. When you're reading a pasuk, you're studying Torah, and it has Shem Hashem, say Adonai, say it. Don't be afraid. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Is it saying Hashem's name in vain? No. Why is it not saying Shem Shamayim Levatana? Because you're not saying Levatana. He was very particular about it. So what did his father say? Chacham Tzvi, Kama tsar nitzta'er otot tzadik azot. How much suffering did my father suffer because of this minhag of kitniyot? Al ken ani omer, and therefore I say, hamivatel minhag zeh shel miniat achilat kitniyot. Anyone who can get rid of this minhag of not eating kitniyot on Pesaḥ, yehi chelki imo. May my portion be with him. Halevy yaskimu imadi gedolei hador, and if only the rabbis of my generation would agree with me. Says Chacham Tzvi, in Germany in the 18th century, I wish we could get rid of this minhag. Help me. My father suffered from this minhag. In source 20, he continues in his book, Shelot v'Tshuvot, Shelat Yabetz. ותמיהני על כל גאוני הדור אשר היו לפנינו שלא שמו על ליבם לדבר הזה. I'm bewildered by all of the rabbis who came before me, that they didn't pay attention לבטל מנהג ממש שאין רוב הציבור יכולים לעמוד בו, to get rid of this minhag that most of the community is not able to stand up to. They can't handle this minhag. ולא, not only that, שהיו מוסיפין ואסרו כמה מינים מפני שדומים לקטניות כמו חרדל. Now we said we already are adding new kitniyot that are not even kitniyot, like mustard. Do you know that it's forbidden now for Ashkenazim to eat mustard? Last year somebody brought me Kasher LePesaḥ mustard with no kitniyot. What was it? It was slime with yellow food coloring. It was poisonous to eat it. And they ate it because they're not allowed to eat mustard seeds. Why the seeds? Because the seeds, they're like the kitniyot. Kmo kimel ve'anis. Kimel, I don't know the English word for kimel, but anis is they make arak out of it. The licorice, this one smells like black licorice. That. Now the Ashkenazim don't eat those things. ואפילו השמנים שנעשו מדברים מהם החמירו. They even prohibited the oil that comes out of the kitniyot. And he says, ובהיותי במנהיים, in the second paragraph, when I lived in Mannheim, רצו לאסור פרי הארץ שקוראים ארד אפל, or kartoffeln. Yochanan, forgive me for butchering German. I don't speak German. Yes? There was an attempt to prohibit potatoes in Ashkenaz. Do you know this? The Chachamim of Ashkenaz tried to prohibit potatoes because they are kitniyot. I need you to imagine something. Think about Ashkenazi Jews today for Pesaḥ, in a month from now. Think of all the food that they eat, not what they're not allowed to eat. What is left? What's left is chicken and meat and potatoes and carrots and pretty much nothing else. Imagine you took away potatoes. What's left? He said they tried to get rid of Vani Amadati Kenegdam. And I stood up against them. Why? Because you can make flour out of potatoes. They wanted to stop letting the Jews eat potatoes. In my family, from my wife's side, there are people who don't eat potato starch on Pesaḥ. It's kitniyot. All of those cookies and the cakes and the cereals and really, I'll tell you the truth, all of that Pesaḥ stuff is disgusting. It's essentially potatoes with chocolate and sugar, and potatoes with whipped cream, and it's potatoes with raspberry jam, and it's potatoes, like you would never eat a potato like that. I don't know why they do that, but that's what all of the Pesaḥ food, it's potatoes with sugar. They wanted even to take that away, so I stood up against them. V'nitzachti otam. How did I defeat them? Al yedei anshei hakahal. He led a coup. He led a revolution. He didn't go to the rabbis. The rabbis were not listening. So he went to the people. And he convinced the people to tell the rabbis no. That's how much he was against kitniyot. He was willing to rebel the people against the rabbis. Umatov im yaskimu kol chachamei hador. If only all of the rabbis of our generation could agree already on this. He said, and I'm wondering if we'll ever live to see a generation where this minhag will go away because the zealots, the kanaim, have taken over Judaism, the fanatics. And in our generation, they're more afraid of the minhagim than they are of the prohibitions of the Torah. How many people have I had come to my house who don't keep Shabbat, they eat nevelot utrevot, but they won't eat in my house on Pesach because I eat kitniyot? Are you out of your mind? Lighting a fire on Shabbat you don't care about, but not eating hummus because it's made from garbanzo beans, that I'm strict about. What is it worth, these minhagim? Says Chacham Tzvi, we live in a world where it probably will never get fixed because everybody wants to be more religious than everybody else. And it's the end. Rabbi Chaim Mordechai Margoliot, otherwise known as Margolius, in his book Sharei Teshuvah, he mentions the Gadol, one Chacham, Haya machmir af bekafeh. He was strict even about coffee. Why is coffee kasher LePesaḥ? Is coffee not made from a bean? No, I know that it's not a real bean. Yeah, you and I both know that, correct? But they call it a coffee bean, no? Why coffee is not kitniyot? They wanted to. They tried in Ashkenaz to get rid of the coffee beans. My father once gave a shiur, or maybe I taught it, I don't remember. If you ever wonder why Maxwell House Coffee gives free Haggadot for Pesaḥ, part of that has to do with an arrangement with the rabbis that they would produce Haggadot if you would not prohibit coffee for Pesaḥ. But there was a period. They almost took away your coffee. No. Source 22. The Aruch HaShulchan, Russia, Lithuania, 18th, 19th century. And he says that even you should know even though Medina, according to the law, you're allowed to eat rice and kitot on Pesach, we don't, and he mentions a whole long thing. And listen to what he writes in the bold. This prohibition, it's a prohibition from where? It's a prohibition. Because our forefathers received it in a tradition. Mishum gader medin Torah. That it's there to protect a Torah law. Which Torah law is it there to protect? Not to eat chametz on Pesach. That's what it's protecting. Asur lanu levatel. It's forbidden for us to get rid of this minhag. Again, the word asur, isur. V'mefakpekim v'mekilim b'zeh. And those people who are not so strict about this, or they doubt or question the minhag, I'm not hiding right now. Me'idin al etzmam, they testify about themselves, she'en behem yirat shamayim v'yirat chet, that they have no fear of God and no fear of sin. Ve'en beki'im b'derechei Torah, and they know nothing about the way the Torah works. There's a saying that says that those who live in glass houses should not throw stones. You're telling me now isur. You're telling me avotenu. You're telling me rabotenu. You're telling me kadmonim. You're telling me all these words. And they don't fit with any of the context that we know about the Torah. And if we have questions on the minhag, now we become the people who have no fear of heaven and we don't understand the Torah. Nonetheless, kol medinot Ashkenaz v'Tzorfat v'Rusia Polania, all of the countries of France and Germany and Russia and Poland, kimu v'kiblu alehem v'ad zaram. This is language from where? From Megillat Esther, which we read yesterday. They accepted upon themselves hachumra hatova halazod, this beautiful chumrah, sheyesh batam kikar, which has a lot of reason to it. Uporetz geder, and whoever breaks this minhag, yishchenu nachash, he should be bitten by a snake. Now, when it says bitten by a snake, it doesn't mean a snake should come and bite you. Why does it say bitten by a snake? It's a rabbinic saying. Nachash is an acronym for? For nidui, cherem, and shamta. 3 levels of excommunication. Meaning, if you break the minhag, we should take them out of the Jewish people. If I were to tell you which is the most prevalent of all the opinions, I think source 22 summarizes the way that Ashkenazi Chachamim today feel about Kitniyot. But let's go to New York City, 20th century. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Alav Shalom. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was asked that word in bold in 23. Can you tell me what it says? What does it say? In bold, in source 23.
Nut?
Yeah, peanut. You know what a peanut is?
Yes.
Yeah, peanut. Yeah, peanut butter, peanut candies. So this peanut, what do you call the Mexican candy, the round one, that was sugar, made out of peanuts?
Mazapan.
That one, very good. That's we get it over here with chocolate on it. Pesaḥ is made out of peanut candies. So peanuts in Ashkenaz used to be that you took away all of the oil from corn, all the oils they could use. So what's left? Peanut oil. They asked Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, hey, is peanut oil kitniyot? Now I would love to go through this whole letter with you, but really I can't. I'm out of my time and I'm not even done with the source sheet. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein goes through the whole logic of kitniyot and he says there's no logical reason for kitniyot. There's no criteria which can tell you something is kitniyot, something is not kitniyot. The only criteria we have, if in Ashkenaz they didn't eat it, meaning they prohibited it because of kitniyot, then it's a problem of kitniyot. And if they did not know about it in Ashkenaz, then it cannot be part of kitniyot. And therefore he says, in Russia there was no kitniyot, we don't know, there was no peanuts, we don't know what that was. And therefore unless you have a minhag in your family, from your forefathers, from Europe, not to eat peanuts, you can use peanut oil on Pesaḥ, and that would apply to all the kitniyot. You mentioned quinoa, someone mentioned in quinoa, in Poland, Russia, Germany, Lithuania, do you think they knew what quinoa was? Yesterday nobody knew what quinoa was. I grew up eating quinoa because that healthy man I told you in my community, we all grew up eating quinoa. But the rest of the Jewish community, 20 years ago, they were eating quinoa. It cannot be prohibited because of kitniyot. Nobody knew about it to make it a prohibition. Corn is from the Americas. Corn is something that comes from this country. How did it become an Ashkenazi minhag to prohibit something they didn't know about? But okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Chacham Ovdei Yosef in source 24. He was asked, what about food that Sephardim make in their pots and pans where they cook kitniyot? And they make food for Ashkenazim, non-kitniyot food. So potatoes, vegetables, they make it for them in their kitniyot pots and pans. Says Chacham Ovdei Yosef, look on source 6, page 6, at the bottom of the page. Afilum hakelim, top of page 6, b'nei yoman, even if they were used in the last 24 hours for kitniyot, yesh lahatir, it's mutar. There's no reason here to say that Ashkenazim are not allowed to eat from Sefaradim's utensils. And as he says in source on page 8, at the top left of the page, va'amet va'shalom me'avu. They should love truth and peace. Ki haTorah deracheha derechei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom. The Torah's ways are pleasant and beautiful. We should be able to eat what we can eat with each other. And as Ashkenazim are allowed to eat things that were made in kitniyot utensils. Rabbi Eliezer Melamed in source 25, and then Rav Kook in source 26. Rav Kook was from Russia, then in Israel, in the 18th and 19th century. I'm going to tell you the story outside, because I don't want to take up all your time. There's some beautiful pieces here. Maybe one day you'll invite me about a shiur, about the writings of Rav Kook in Halakha, in this particular area. But for right now, I'll tell you the story in short. In Israel, there was a factory that would make sesame oil. And it was part of the new Jews that were coming to Israel and building the country. And he was very afraid that if he would close his factory for Pesaḥ, that he wouldn't survive, and the Jewish establishments and finances, the economy would go down. And he came to Rav Kook and said, can you certify my sesame oil kasher LePesaḥ? And Rav Kook said, let me think about it, because I'm not sure if it's kitniyot or not. Rav Kook did his research and said, we didn't prohibit sesame in Ashkenaz, but even if we did, the oil that comes from the kitniyot is not prohibited. And Rav Kook decided to give him a hechsher. The Badatz, the Ida Charedit, the Charedim in Jerusalem, they went crazy. If they hated Rav Kook already, this added fuel to the fire. See, this rabbi, he's not observant of halakha, he allows people to kitniyot on Pesaḥ. And Rav Kook wrote them letters trying to explain to them, but sesame seeds, not even kitniyot. The oil from the sesame seeds, not kitniyot. At a certain point, they just put a cherem against him. And Rav Kook says the following. He says, I know about this generation. Look on page 10. I'm not from the people that are too embarrassed to say, Ta'iti, I made a mistake. He said, if you could prove to me I made a mistake, I would take it back. But look here. He says, we're part of a generation. Maybe I told you to look in the wrong place. We're part of a generation. Here, page 9. Says Rav Kook, Shani yodea, I know. Barur tchunat bnei dorenu. I understand the people of our generation. Shedafka al yedei ma shiru shekol ma sheyesh la'atir al pi omek hadin matirin anachnu. That when they see rabbis who permit things according to halakha when it's permissible, yaskilu ladat, they will understand that we are telling them the truth. Meaning, people know today, whenever you ask the rabbi, what's the answer from the rabbi going to be? No. If we show people that we say yes when things are allowed, and we only say no when things are prohibited, that will build the trust between us and the communities again. And we'll be able to lead the communities. They'll know when we say no, we really mean no. And we say yes, it's because we know that it's true. And they'll trust us again, and we can mend this relationship. But how do the Chachamim and the Badatz feel? You can't trust the people. You give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. I think if I had to summarize, Kitniyot is not important here in the conversation of Rav Kook. But what about the trust between rabbis and kihilot? When someone in my kihila asks me a question, I trust them. I trust that if I tell them yes, they're not going to eat chametz tomorrow. They're just eating peanuts. I trust them that if I say no, when I say no, they trust me that if it was allowed, I would tell them. The trust that exists between leadership and the community is so important. Says Rav Kook, when you start to undermine that trust, everything will fall apart. They will stop trusting the Chachamim. They'll actually end up eating chametz on Pesaḥ. What are you going to get out of it? Aside from ruining the relationship between the rabbis and the Jewish people. But you don't have leadership like that. On source 27, the Chavetz Chaim, the author of the Mishnah in Bewan, Russia and Poland, he writes that if a person doesn't have what to eat on Pesaḥ, even if they're Ashkenazim, they can eat kitniyot on Pesaḥ. Why? Because it's not a prohibition. It's not a halakha. It's simply a custom. And a person doesn't have the ability to eat food and they have to eat kitniyot, they can eat kitniyot. In source 28, Daruch HaShulchan, he also mentions, the same one who said that it's a prohibition, it's forbidden, that in a place where there's no food, when there's a famine, when there's not enough food in a country, people can eat kitniyot on Pesaḥ. And look at source 29. This one is very important. Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan of Kovna, he writes in a Shelot V'Tshuvot Ber Yitzchak that kitniyot marvin otam mikodem Pesaḥ, you can mix them into your food before Pesaḥ. Da'az mutar levatlo berov, you can nullify kitniyot not in 60. No, kitniyot is not prohibited. You just nullify it in a majority. That's 51%. Yeah. Kevan deshem heter alav mikodem Pesaḥ. So if I have food that was made before Pesaḥ and it has kitniyot inside of it, but it is not the majority of the food, can Ashkenazim eat that food according to Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan? Absolutely. Because kitniyot cannot be more strict than chametz itself. And therefore all of these foods, they say you cannot eat them because maybe they have kitniyot, because maybe last year they told me that the paper towel, you know the paper towel you get for your kitchen? Ashkenazim have to rip off the first part of the roll because the glue that they use has cornstarch in it. And if they have the cornstarch and they wipe the plate clean afterwards and they eat food on it, they're eating corn on Pesaḥ, how far can you take a minhag? How far can you take it? Let's pretend it's true. Fantasy land, the corn and the glue. Let's pretend it's true. Even by chametz, you wouldn't say such things. Glue? And here, what are you talking about? Kitniyot. Okay. I want to read to you two last sources, and then tell you a third one outside, without reading it for you. And hopefully you'll give me just a couple of minutes, and I'll end my shiur. I B'ezrat Hashem. Look at source 30. Rabbi Yosef Masas. Rabbi Yosef Masas is one of my favorite Sephardic Chachamim. He was born in Morocco, lived in Algeria, was rabbi in Tlemcen for many years, then became the chief rabbi of Haifa. He was appointed chief rabbi of Haifa by David Ben Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, who were very good friends. Rabbi Yosef Masas writes the following. See, we heard from the Ashkenazi Chachamim that there are gzerot, there are decrees, there were batei din. I want to read you a sentence just for a moment. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, when he was speaking about that, about the gzerot and the bedin, look what he says. Look on page 5 in the right column. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said, "The din ma shenesar b'minhag ha'en ze davar nesar b'kibutz chachamim." This prohibition of kitniyot was never decided by any group of chachamim. Ela shenhigu ta'am lachmir sholechol minim elu. It only was something that certain rabbis told the people, but there was no bedin, there was no decree, there is no gzera. Or Moshe Feinstein says there's no such thing. It's very important to know that. But the Ashkenazim today operate, there's a decree, there's a minhag, we cannot deviate from this minhag, it doesn't matter. Even the Sephardim who did not eat kitniyot on Pesaḥ, and I'm sure, are there any Sephardim here that have families have a minhag not to eat kitniyot on Pesaḥ? There's some Moroccans like that, my mother's family for example, except for certain kitniyot like green fava beans or the like. Look at what he says. Ve'ach ha'porshim hem Ashkenazim hamachmirim chumrot rechokot b'Pesaḥ. The people who don't eat these things are the Ashkenazim who have all kinds of outlandish prohibitions, customs on Pesaḥ. Kegon le'asor kitniyot, like not eating kitniyot. He calls it a chumra rechoka, a very unrealistic prohibition. ואפילו גרעיני קפה, שמא ידמו אותם ההמון לקטניות. They don't even eat coffee beans because maybe people will think they're קטניות. כמו שכתב השערי תשובה. וכמה וכמה חומרות כאלו כידוע, and if you know that האשכנזים by Pesach have many such tendencies. עוד ראיתי כתוב בספר, איני זוכר שמו כעת, I remember seeing in a book whose name I don't remember right now, Rabbi Yosef Masas, שכתב הגאון בעל חיי אדם, the author חיי אדם, רבי אברהם דנציג. Yeah. He writes, רצה לאסור בפסח אף תפוחי אדמה. He wanted to prohibit even potatoes on פסח. מפני שמחמיצים, because they become חמץ. ואך מפני שפרנסת עניי רוסיה ופולין היא מתפוחי אדמה, לכן שלחו לו בזה הלשון. But because the Jews of Poland and Russia, their whole life is potatoes. They wrote to him, הגאון בעל חיי אדם, דע כי חיי האדם הם תפוחי אדמה. Rabbi Chaye Adam, your book is called The Life of Man. You should know the life of us is potatoes. Please don't take away our life. Vim ken, en litmoa la porshim mehate bepesach mechashash rachok hanizkar. He said, don't be surprised when you hear that certain Jews don't drink tea on Pesach because maybe there's chametz in the tea bag. V'ach anana Sfaradim, we the Sfaradim, dazlinan be'emek shaveh, that our whole path in Torah is the path of balance. Hu emek hamelech, that's the way of the king. Malcho shel olam baruch hu, the king of the universe, God. Leso rak et ha'asur. Here's our way to halakha. This has nothing to do with Kitniyot. The way Sephardim learn Torah, we prohibit that which is prohibited, ulehatir et hamutar, and we permit everything which is permissible. Ulehosif rak me'at chumrot be'ezeh dvarim yiduim, and we only add chumrot on very particular things. There are certain things, like we add a few minutes to Shabbat, before Shabbat. There are things that are very important that they require a chumrah. Velo la'asot hasiyag yoter ma'ikar. But you can never make the fence bigger than the main mitzvah. Imagine if you had a house. You live in a 2-story house, and you built a wall around your house, a fence. Imagine you made the fence around your house 7 stories high. What kind of ugly house would you have? What kind of Torah do you have that is 2 stories high with a 20-foot wall? It doesn't make sense. A person has to make sure that their Torah, the walls are not taller than the Torah. And then he says on page 11, Imken, therefore, busha uchlima lachosh lechashashot rechokot ke'elu. It's an embarrassing thing to worry about all of these minhagim on Pesach. It's embarrassing. It shows that a person doesn't know Torah. It's embarrassing. And in source 31, Michtav ma'alato higiani bi'ito. I received your letter, my dear Rabbi. Odot ha'orez, regarding rice. Asher shama kevodo, you heard Sha'anachnu po Morocco, that we in Morocco asarnu oto isur gamur, that we prohibited eating rice on Pesach completely. V'tama kevodo madua, and you're wondering why. Ima, in your family they ate rice on Pesach? Maybe she had to step out. In my mother's family, they didn't eat rice on Pesach. Mamash, they don't eat rice on Pesach. As he wanted to know, how could it be that these Sephardic Jews are not eating rice on Pesach? Listen to the answer. The answer is very important. For all of the Sfaradim who have a minhag not to eat kitniyot on Pesach, it's very important to listen to this. Shmu'a kozevet shama kevodo. You heard a false rumor about us Moroccan Jews. Ki ha'orez hitiru hetero pashut kasher katavda. It's mutar. Rice is permissible. ורק בזמן הקודם, only earlier times, נהגו בו חשש איסור מפני שהיה בו מעבר היה בא מעבר לים בספינות, עם שקי קמח, because it would come from across the sea. Where did rice come from? They didn't grow it in Morocco. Where did the rice come from?
China.
Okay, China. Rice can come from where else? India, very good. The rice used to come to them from across the ocean. Im sakei kemach, and they came with sacks of flour. V'chashashu pen yitzeh kemach min ikvei ereg hasakim. They were afraid that maybe the flour would come out of the holes of the sacks. V'ikanes sakei haorez, and it would come into the sacks of rice. Kasher ra'u enehem pamim harbe. They saw with their own eyes that it happened. Sakei orez alehem ava kemach hitim, that the sack of rice was covered in flour. Gam chashashu od pen mesirim klipato berechaim shel kemach. And they were afraid also that maybe when they take off the shell, they mill it in the mill that they use for the grains. But the rice that we grew in Morocco, but the rice which they grew in Morocco and they used to take off the shell, they saw where it came from and it had no chametz, everybody ate it. Except for some, they're not chasidim, mitchazdim, people who pretended to be so religious. They said, well, we don't eat the one from Morocco because of the one that comes from India. But now, that all of these reasons don't exist, the rice has no problem of chametz, everyone can eat the rice. Except for some strict people, which didn't want to get rid of their minhag. Why are the Sephardim still not eating rice on Pesach? What's the reason? Says the Rabbi Yosef Masas, who's an expert psychologist, clearly in human nature. He says, "Mipnei machalat hadimayon." Because they have an illness, a sickness. The disease is the disease of an imagination. They're afraid, what's going to be, what's going to happen, I'm going to eat the rice, Hashem's going to punish me, lightning bolt, my grandmother's going to get mad at me, Chachamim are going to hate me. All of the imagination, they're sick. They're sick. What do you want from sick people? Sick people, you have to say, and you walk away. But you don't cater to sick people. You don't learn halachot from people that their mind is not clear. They have imagination. Okay, you understand. Machalat and Dimayon, Rabbi Yosef Masas uses it in many places. People have a lot of imagination, a lot of fear. They're afraid if they do something will happen to them. Rabotai, if you do something according to the Torah, and the Mishnah, and the Talmud, and the Rambam, and the Shulchan Aruch, and all of the Sephardim in the world, what are you afraid something's going to happen to you on Pesaḥ? How could it possibly be asur? It's a fact. Is there chametz? Do the Ashkenazim have what to worry about? Maybe there's chametz in the rice. I don't appreciate that people consider Ashkenazim to be stupid. Ashkenazim are intelligent human beings like all the human beings. They also know that rice doesn't have chametz inside of it. So what's the fear? Imagination. Says Rabbi Yosef, I can tell you nothing more v'shalom, and I have to leave you because that's the answer about rice. But where could the minhag of rice actually come from? So here I ended my shiur. I want to tell you one last source. And this source, I didn't bring it in my source sheet because this book, Besamim Rosh. Anyone know who wrote this book, Besamim Rosh?
Shaul Berlin.
Oh, very good. So they claim, Moy knows his stuff. They claim it was written by the times of the Rishonim, by the Rosh. But it seems very likely that it was a forgery in the early days of the Maskilim. There was a forgery. And therefore this book has a very interesting reputation. Let's just put it that way. The way we treat this book is if it supports anything we already know to be true, we quote it. And if not, we don't take it much into consideration. There's a few other books like this, not the only one. He claims that the minhag of Kitniyot originated somewhere else entirely. It originated with the Karaim. Have you heard of the Karaim before? The Karaites? And I want to be very clear. I have friends who are Karaites. I have people who pray in my Beit HaKnesset sometimes who are Karaites. I'm not speaking negatively about Karaites. I'm not a Karaite. I think it's very obvious to you that I'm not a Karaite. Yes, I'm a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, as Paul says in the New Testament. I'm a student of Chachamim who believe in the Talmud and the Mishnah, and you shouldn't accuse me otherwise. Nonetheless, among the Karaim, the Torah says you're not allowed to eat chametz on Pesaḥ. We have a Mishnah which tells us what are the 5 grains. But the Karaim who don't accept the authority of the Mishnah include all kinds of other things in the category of chametz. They include, as you know, Karaim I'm not a Karaite Chacham, so I don't want to speak on behalf of the Karaite community. If you want to consult, there's an article that I saw written by Karaim about the minhag of Kitniyot. There are other things. Some eat rice, some don't eat rice, some eat beans, some don't eat beans. Many Karaim don't drink wine on Pesaḥ because wine is chametz. There are many such minhagim that exist among the Karaim, and says the Besamim Rosh that this minhag ended up in the Jewish community because of interactions with the Karaim. And Rabbi Yosef Kapach, he writes, if I recall correctly, that therefore somebody who does not eat Kitniyot on Pesaḥ is violating the prohibition of following in the ways that violate the Torah, because it's a minhag that comes outside of the community of those people who follow rabbinic law. Now, to summarize, I don't care if you eat rice on Pesaḥ, or you eat beans on Pesaḥ, or you eat peanuts on Pesaḥ. It really doesn't matter to me. If you want to be hungry, you are more than welcome to be hungry. Yes, but I want to say 2 things. The first, I'm sure those of you who live in Mexico, you know a little bit about Mexican food. So you may notice a few people with the last name Lopez in my group. Baruch Hashem, a number of years ago, HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed me that in my kehillah, I have a whole family that joined me who originates from Oaxaca, Mexico. And that means that very often when I get hungry and I need good food, so I always can go to the Lopez family and eat the best food. I'm going to start telling you the names. You're going to get hungry, and it's for you. It's already 2 hours later. No restaurants are open to go eat, so I don't want to make you hungry. But let's give you an example of a meal. Yes, a meal from Oaxaca. Okay, I'll tell you a Sephardic meal later. You have 2 types of tortillas, no? You have flour tortilla, yeah, from harina, and you have tortilla made out of corn. Yes, we know this. What? Now, you have 2 types of flour. Then you bring out the meal. What's the meal made out of? You have meat, and you have chicken, or you have fish, depending what you're eating, right, with your tortilla. You then have rice, and you have beans, and you have corn. And this is the whole meal. In order to make this meal kasher LePesaḥ for Sephardim, what do you have to remove from this meal? You put a salsa, you have avocado, you make some mole sauce, whatever you have all those things you're going to have, okay? Now, in order to make this meal 1,000% kasher LePesaḥ, according to Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam, what do you have to do in this meal? What do you have to take out?
Flour tortilla.
The flour tortilla. What about the rest of the food?
You don't have to remove.
Yochelu anavim veizbau. You can eat it, you could be happy. Pesach is a beautiful holiday. But what if you follow the minhag of not eating kitniyot on Pesach? What do you have to take out of this meal? The wheat flour, the corn tortilla, the beans, the rice, the corn. And what are you left eating with? Salsa with a spoon and some slices of avocado. What are you left eating? Misken, you're going to die of hunger by the end of the meal. When the first Rabbeinu Manoach said, we don't eat kitniyot on Pesach because it doesn't make us happy. Can you imagine how sad people are with the food they have to eat on Pesach? How many potatoes and hard-boiled eggs can you eat in 8 days? Chamana, it's not. People suffer because of this food. It's not v'samachta b'chagecha. If you stopped eating kitniyot to make people happy, then the custom of not eating kitniyot today makes people sad. And the last, I told you, has nothing to do with Pesach. In general, this has to do with halacha. I live in a generation in which following the Torah and the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch is not Jewish enough for most of the Jewish people around me. All of a sudden I have to do all kinds of outlandish things. This rabbi said, and that rabbi said, and this minhag, and that minhag, and his grandmother, and her aunt. Where do we learn halakha from? If not from the Torah and from the Chachamim. We're Jews. That's what we are. We're not fiddler on the roof. It's not tradition dancing with a violin and a bottle of vodka on our head. There's a Torah. Judaism is not a joke. Judaism is real. We are part of a real nation that has a real Torah. So we decide to follow the Torah. So we eat everything what we eat on Pesach. All of a sudden, people come around and say, they're not religious enough, we can't rely on them, we can't eat in their house, we can't marry their children, we can't go to school with them, we can't bring them to Beit Knesset. And I'm asking myself, how much longer are you going to live with an inferiority complex that following the Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not good enough? How much longer are you going to hide and say, I follow Shulchan Aruch, but I don't want to tell anybody I follow Shulchan Aruch because I'm crazy? How much longer are we going to mislead the Ashkenazim who want to follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Torah and the Talmud and tell them, because your great-grandmother was born in Poland, you have to follow minhagim that someone made up? Why can't Ashkenazim also come join us together learning Torah properly? How long are you going to hold back the tradition of Ibn Sefarad, of those who came from Sefarad, from the whole world? If anybody needs this Torah today, it's the whole Klal Yisrael. It's the whole Jewish people. Eating rice and beans is not a mitzvah on Pesach. But I will tell you very quickly, the attitude that Jewish people have towards rice and beans on Pesach tells me everything I need to know about their understanding of Torah and Halakha and their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything I need to know. This symptom is the root of a much deeper problem. And B'ezrat Hashem, I bless you all. It's before Pesach. I bless everyone here, especially the leaders of this Beit HaMidrash. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless you twofold. That all that you do should be rewarded. All of those who may oppose you, I don't know if there's such a thing, but if there is, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should clear them out of your path. And this Beit HaMidrash should become a lighthouse for all the people in the world, Sephardim, Ashkenazim, the whole world, to know that there's a way of Torah, Derech HaMelech, it's the way of the king, Emek HaShaveh, a place of balance, a place of unity, a place of togetherness. Don't be afraid. Al tira v'al techad. Do not be afraid. Kimcha Adonai Elohecha b'chol asher telech. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with you in everything that you do. Thank you for the zechut of allowing me to learn with you. I hope one day maybe I'll see you in Mexico, but until then, I invite all of you to come visit me here in San Diego. I will stick around to answer any questions. If anyone needs to go, I know what time it is. Please feel free to go. But I'm here at your service to answer any questions you might have. Toda rabah, tizku l'mitzvot. Thank you really for learning with me tonight.